Lucy Letby. They don't have a clue. Of the many things that are out of trial, it's apparent how many people have not only been able to understand what she is, but how they have struggled to reconcile the information that was put before them with the crimes that she had committed. For instance, in the Sunday Times, Judith Moritz wrote, "The trial is over, the verdicts are in, and yet the fundamental question remains unanswered. Who is Lucy Letby, and why did she commit such heinous crimes?" It's a question that I've been wrestling with since I started covering the story in 2018, when Letby was first arrested. You, of course, having followed my detailed analysis about Lucy Letby, have received both the conclusion as to what she is and the conclusion as to why she has killed. Authoritative, detailed analyses that answer those key questions. I've encouraged you to share those videos more widely so that individuals such as this journalist receive the answers that they're looking for. But it is also worthwhile examining what this journalist has to say, what she's seen, to look at the further clues with regard to Lucy Letby and also the failure to ascertain what she is. The journalist wrote, "From the first time I saw her at Warrington Magistrates Court, I struggled to tally the woman on the screen with the horror of the charges. I thought a clearer picture would come into focus at the trial, but as it neared, and proceeding to move to Manchester, it became clear that there would not be enough seats in the courtroom for all the reporters who wanted to attend. An overspill annex was arranged in another building, but I was keen to be in the courtroom itself. I put my name down for one of the 5 media seats available. By the end of the trial, when Letby was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others, I realised I'd had a seat at the ringside of history. That's not how it felt on the first day, though. I looked at Letby through the glass wall of the dock, and I had the same impression as before. She seemed ordinary." Now, once again, that is invariably what you will find with many of the individuals that undertake such abhorrent crimes, because contrary to the image that goes through people's mind, these individuals, our kind, don't wander around with horns and a tail stinking of sulphur. They don't sit there laughing manically to themselves. Indeed, the very reason that someone such as Lucy Letby was able to do what she did was because she had the veneer of acceptability, the facade of being a kind and decent person. That enabled her to control people through causing them to trust her, to like her, to believe that she was a kind and decent person, so that they didn't see or act upon any alarms that might happen to have been ringing in relation to her. Her ordinariness enabled her to achieve what she wanted, but also the fact that, once again, this journalist has highlighted that, demonstrates the fact that they simply don't have a clue when it comes to understanding our kind. She continues, "The charges were read out, 7 charges of murder and 15 of attempted murder, a litany of horror being levelled at a woman you wouldn't notice if you walked past her in the street. BBC Panorama asked me to make a programme about the case. The producer, Jonathan Coffey, suggested documenting my struggle as I listened to both prosecution and defence and weighed up the evidence, much of which was circumstantial. The Crown opened its case. Baby by baby, week by week, the allegations were laid out. At the start of the trial, we had been given a 25-page alphabetical glossary of medical terminology, running from abdominal distension, swelling of the abdomen, usually caused by abnormal volumes of air, to volvulus, abnormal twisting of the gastrointestinal tract. I kept it close at hand, as the court was presented with blood gas records, clinical notes, observation charts and graphs. There was expert evidence on the micro-detail of air embolism and insulin poisoning, and circumstantial evidence examining how Letby was present every time a baby collapsed suddenly. The accounts of the parents were the hardest to bear. You saw how they would run from the joy of expectant parenthood through the days after birth to the disbelief when their children fell suddenly ill, and then the raw grief and trauma of their injury and death. It was harrowing. Of course, it is that which Lucy Letby fed upon. As a narcissist, the emotions of those individuals, their initial joy, the daze, the disbelief, the worry, the raw grief and trauma, all amounted to fuel to Lucy Letby. Furthermore, of course, it enabled her to recognise that the parents were under control, because she understood that it was her doing, that she had placed them in that state of affairs. The journalist continues by explaining, I looked at Letby, but she was passive throughout the trial. She would either look down at her iPad to follow the evidence or look directly ahead with a fixed gaze. Then one day in February that changed. It was the moment one doctor entered the witness box and gave his name. She lost her composure and tried to leave the dock. As I've explained previously, in my analysis of the evidence, this was as a consequence of the appearance of the doctor amounted to a threat to control, and she sought to leave the dock in order to reassert that control through withdrawal. The moment has been pored over and analysed, but it was unexpected and strikingly odd. The registrar, whose name was protected by court order, was sitting behind a screen. His voice alone seemed to overwhelm her. The prosecution later described him as her boyfriend, which she denied. Early on, I'd asked some of them on the prosecution team whether they were planning to discuss Letby's motive or character, and had been told that they were not. As the case progressed, I realised that I would need to piece things together by other means. The standout document was a small green post-it note that the police had found inside Letby's diary, which had a teddy bear cover. It was first shown to the jury briefly at the start of the trial and was not due to be presented in evidence for months. I had written to the judge to ask him to make it public at the start, and he agreed. I'm evil, I did this, it declared. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. It looked like a confession to me, but Letby's defence team painted it as a stream of consciousness rant of the wrongly accused. More rambling notes appeared later in the case. They were all covered in Letby's dense, chaotic scrawl. We also saw reams of text messages that she sent to friends and colleagues. Those, of course, are Hoovers, seeking to assert control. And the rambling notes, as I've explained in parts passing, were an indirect assertion of control, seeking to generate sympathy and pity. I compiled them all in an effort to get inside her head. Some texts looked like she was fishing for sympathy. It's heartbreaking, but it's not about me, she wrote at one point. Others suggested a God complex. How do some sick babies get through and others die so suddenly and unexpectedly? Guess it's how it's meant to be. I've explained that any manifestation of a God complex is not a separate condition, but simply a manifestation of her narcissism. The Panorama producer, Jonathan, was keen on finding out about the nurse's background. We went to Hereford to meet one of Letby's school friends, Dawn. I'd been expecting to find that Letby's background was chaotic and dysfunctional. What I did not anticipate was being met by a jolly, articulate woman in a scarf, whose loyalty to her friend was unshakable. We drove around the city, and Dawn showed me their old school and sixth form college. We were the nerdy ones, she said. Dawn told us that it had been Lucy's dream to become a nurse. She had had quite a difficult birth herself and was quite poorly, and I think that's affected a lot of her life. As I explained in parts passing, this led her parents to mollycoddle her, to protect her, to smother her, creating a lack of control environment. She feels that what she's called to do was to help children who might have been born in similar circumstances. Indeed, that would be part of the facade that Letby would advance for the purpose of asserting control. Dawn was utterly unable to believe that the charges against her friend were true. The only way I'd ever believe that she was guilty is if she tells me she's guilty, she said. I too was curious to hear from Letby herself. Courtroom 7 was a changed place on the morning her defence began. I turned up as usual and found that the courtroom was locked. When we were admitted, I saw why. Letby had emerged from behind the glass of the dock and been led to the witness box in the centre. Once she was in position, we were allowed to take our seats. She was clutching something under the desk. It looked like a furry stress ball and was described as a comforter. Triangulation by object, pity play. Letby's barrister, Ben Myers' case, he started softly, asking her about her background. Her answers tallied with Dawn's: a happy childhood, no problems. Which, as I explained, ultimately led to the fact that because there was no signs of any conduct disorder during her formative years, that she didn't get across the line to be found to be a psychopath. She was polite and cooperative, but the mood changed as soon as the prosecuting counsel, Nick Johnson Casey, got on his feet. The cross-examination was a turning point. The questions came thick and fast, and remember, of course, they will all amount to challenge fuel, repeated threats to Letby's control. The journalist stated she remembered reading that when he gave evidence, Harold Shipman patronised the lawyers at his trial, oozing contempt at those he considered his intellectual inferiors. That, of course, is the grandiosity of that particular narcissist, as he sought to nullify the threat to control by putting down those questioning him. Letby did not take this tack, but there were times when she made it clear that she felt more medically qualified, grandiosity, to understand the case than the barrister questioning her did. She disagreed with nursing guidelines, lack of accountability. She disagreed with doctors and medical experts. She started to disagree with evidence that she had agreed earlier, contrarian behaviour as a consequence of compartmentalisation. At one point, she maintained that she did not phone the parents of one baby to tell them their son was bleeding and had become unwell. Previously, she had accepted that she did make this call. It shows the revision of history. But as agreed evidence, said Johnson. Well, I disagree with it now, Letby retorted. She was tying herself in knots. You're lying, aren't you, Lucy Letby? Johnson asked. The longer this went on, the more Letby's voice dropped. Then she asked to stop. She became tearful and the court adjourned. Pity play, attempt to assert control. Letby managed to get through the rest of the cross-examination, but there's no doubt that it was a bruising experience. I wondered if she'd been advised not to go into the witness box, but had chosen to do so anyway. We'll never know. There's a distinct possibility that she'd been advised not to. After all, she doesn't have to prove anything. It is the Crown that has to prove her guilt. She, because of the presumption of innocence, can just sit there and see if they get across that threshold. Many a narcissist, of course, wants to be able to have their say because a court is a stage to a narcissist. That, of course, is often something that can be used to a person's advantage, particularly if your opponent is a narcissist, where you're perhaps seeking to recover money from them, property from them, or commonly you're involved in divorce or child custody instances. Mid-range narcissists in particular are prone to the give them enough rope principle. If you'd like to understand how you can utilise that to your advantage, then I recommend that you watch my video, Give the Narcissist Enough Rope, and also go to the Knowledge Vault and obtain How to Handle the Narcissist at Court. Letby parents, Susan and John, were in court every day. They kept themselves to themselves, but the strain was obvious. She seemed to lose weight. He'd light a cigarette whenever he left the building. Sometimes they were joined by Janet, the only one of Letby's friends to come to court. She used to work at the same hospital as a nursery nurse, but was spending the early days of her retirement in court. She often sat near the reporters during breaks and would chatter about everything, apart from Letby. The defence case ended and the final speeches were delivered. The jury retired to deliberate, a process that was to take them more than 100 hours. In the corridors, Letby's parents paced up and down. Janet did the crossword. Families, media and police officers hung around in anticipation. At last, white smoke. The jurors indicated they'd made decisions on 2 counts of attempted murder. Time stopped as the foreman gave their decisions. Guilty, guilty. There was a gasp in the courtroom as months of pent-up tension began to be released. In the dock, Letby sobbed loudly, her response as a consequence of this exposure, a massive threat to control, of course. Across the room, her mother cried, "No, you can't be serious." But the jurors had been methodical and their deliberations ground on. There were another 20 charges to go. More verdicts came in, this time murder. Guilty, the foreman said again. Both Letby and her mother cried once more. But it was to be the last time I saw either of them. As the hearings continued, it became clear that the Letbys had left. Her friend Janet disappeared too. Letby went down to the cells and refused to come back into the courtroom, assertion of control by withdrawal. The rest of the trial would happen without her. It didn't lessen the impact of the sentencing hearing when, one by one, the babies' families gave their statements. There was total silence inside the courtroom as each spoke of the terrible impact Letby had had on their lives. Letby was told that she would never come out of prison. Her outwardly normal life with its salsa classes and Ibiza holidays has been comprehensively exposed as a lie. Her grinning Facebook photos of student nights out, hen-dos and hijinks seem utterly bizarre. I've watched her up close for nearly a year, and I still can't understand it. After the verdicts, as the lawyers packed up their files and the clerk locked the courtroom, a friend sent me a message. I can't get over the motiveless malignancy of her, she wrote. Then she added what many have been thinking this week. How on earth can you avoid a monster who camouflages themselves so well? This article just goes to demonstrate how many people simply do not have a clue about our kind. Their inability to understand the way this person behaves, and also the failure to recognise those individuals. It also provided me with a further opportunity to highlight aspects of the dynamic that we now know Letby utilises as a narcissist who has psychopathic tendencies and a sadistic streak. But what it does underpin also is the necessity of my work, the applicability of it to so much of what revolves in this world, and whereby you are able to understand Letby, what she is, why she did as she did, why she killed, because of my analyses. And it is demonstrative that a journalist such as this, and so many other people, has no clue whatsoever as to what made Lucy Letby do as she did. You have access to this information. You have the capacity to ensure that others know. You have the capacity to continue to learn, to understand what narcissists and psychopaths are made of, how we present, what it is that we do, and it remains incumbent upon you to also share this knowledge to those that don't have a clue. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.